Created by Jion and Honcha, The Princess's Jewels is the story of a strong woman fighting her way up to the throne to become the first empress, just by using her intelligence, wit, charm, and the help of 5 talented and handsome men who just so happen to be her harem. An entertaining and enticing story about a badass and confident female lead who takes the reins, fights for what she wants and what is just. Yeah, I'm sure we all remember the story that way. Disclaimer. Seriously, please do not go harass anyone here. Well, I recently went back to reread it and go beyond chapter 12. And let me tell you, from that point on, it was a completely different story. There is a political plot about unraveling this drug conspiracy that the evil emperor's concubine, Benella, has going on, as well as stopping a demonic cult that she is also a part of. At the time when this was being uploaded, many readers were in awe of the unapologetic and confident female lead, the hot men, and how pretty the art was, or at least some panels and the dress shots of Ariana. But before I go any further, I want to clarify something. Overall, for its 50 plus chapters, this wasn't nearly as bad as I remember. I have read worse, much worse, but it wasn't good either, because once you get past chapter 12, there is not much novelty. One of the biggest lessons I've learned while trying to write my own novel is that a story isn't just about having good ideas, it's about how those ideas are presented. Structure, pacing, scene order, characterization, how much information to disclose, the setup, the payoff, they are the tools that determine whether those ideas actually land. An incredible concept can feel flat if it's introduced at the wrong time, or without enough build-up, or if it's explained badly, while a simple or bizarre idea can become incredibly compelling if handled well. And nobody gets it perfect on their first draft, or even on their first story. It's something you develop over time by writing, revising, and learning what works. I don't doubt that The Princess's Jewels had ambitious ideas and interesting concepts it wanted to explore. The story had a lot to say. The issue is that the moment it opened its mouth, everything came out scrambled. Ideas, world building, politics, lore, characters, backstories, they never quite clicked. That, in my opinion, is its biggest problem. Followed immediately by the characterization of the main cast and antagonist, but that is for another video. Instead of integrating information naturally into the narrative, the webtoon repeatedly stops to explain itself through exposition dumps, lengthy footnotes, and introducing major pieces of world building that should have been established organically in earlier chapters. Take chapter 15 for example. Rather than letting us discover the state of the world through the story, we are simply told that the evil concubine's pagan forces have already infiltrated the palace, which is a sacred place by the way, leading to famines, refugees, and human trafficking across the empire. The chapter even pauses for a footnote explaining what these pagan forces are, yet we never see any of that in the previous chapters. The only time we get a glimpse of what is happening to the people is in chapter 21, but that has nothing to do with any of the 3 problems mentioned in chapter 15. The opening of chapter 17 consists of the Jewels recounted everything they learned about Benella, who they questioned, what they discovered, and how they pieced it together. All very important information for the plot, mind you. The thing is, chapter 16 showed them how they started their investigation, but we are never shown the things the Jewels say they did, like Han getting invited personally by Benella to one of her private gatherings, or how Ifrit found the alias she was using to purchase illegal magic stones to make business with his country, and also make business with an enemy land, which is very illegal by the way. Chapter 29 has a lengthy footnote explaining how magical books work, how many there are, who is allowed to access them, and what they are primarily used for. Information that isn't necessary for understanding the scene. Chapter 30 opens with another exposition-heavy section, this time explaining House Phantom, Nell's family, alongside another lengthy footnote introducing a fanatical religious group called the Leviathans. Although there are moments where the story moves at a good pace, chapter 6, 10, 26, and 49 for example, for much of the webtoon it swings between two extremes. Sometimes it rushes through major events without giving either the characters or the audience time to absorb them, as in chapter 2 through 10 and chapter 16. Other times it grinds to a halt to explain information that could have been communicated through the narrative. This results in an uneven pacing. Another thing is the convenient plot devices and MacGuffins that simply materialize because the story suddenly needs them. Take chapter 43 for example. The story introduces an ore created by Haveron, one of Ariana's half-brothers, that can store up to 10 years worth of magical energy for use in agriculture. It's put here to be a major solution to the present conflict, but the problem isn't the device itself, it's that the story presents it as an established piece of world building, when the readers are just learning about it the moment it becomes critical to the plot. Now, to be fair, around chapter 21, we are told briefly that Haveron has contributed to advances in agriculture and farming, yet we never know what those advances are, and that information is told to us via a passing remark that the Empress is making while comparing Ariana's achievements to his half-brothers. Interestingly, the story also has the opposite, presenting an idea that should be important, just to not use it at all and or forget about it. Case in point, Jade. During his introduction, we are told he can read the flow of water and decipher the circulation of the world. Later, it's explained that he basically has some form of divine recognition, a very powerful and convenient ability that doesn't get used. In chapter 17, one of the other jewels, Raymond, even suggests using those powers for their plans. The only problem is that the story would end on much earlier if they actually did that. To prevent that, the plot has Jade refuse, claiming he's too busy helping the Empress, then storms off. The context here is that Ariana forced his country to have Jade as a concubine and he dislikes/hates her for it. But the issue, as I see it, is that Jade's refusal doesn't establish a limitation on the power itself. It simply delays its use because the plot needs it to. Rather than giving such an overwhelmingly useful ability believable constraints, the story ignores it altogether, even if using it would have prevented everything that happened during the Sun Ceremony arc. Another example, the book about the divine beasts in chapter 29, the one with the unnecessary footnote. Ariana got it because she wanted to know more about Nell's family, but she couldn't finish it because it was a heavy read, and as she was wondering if she should continue reading it, one of her men appears and takes her away. The book is never mentioned again, and mind you, divine beasts are an important element of the story. We never even get to know the difference between them and the monsters, the ties they have to noble families, or anything really. And then there's the way the story handles emotional, tense, dramatic, and serious moments. Chapter 18, 19, and 20, which I'll talk about later, are one example. Then there's Jade's entire storyline, or the beef Efrit has with Hon, or the entire Witch Hunt arc. This was honestly one of the hardest criticisms for me to put into words, and I'm still not sure if I've captured my thoughts perfectly, but it's as if the story knows these scenes are very important to advance the plot, and the narrative clearly asks the audience to lock in. But when the moment finally arrives, or even after it's over, the emotional impact is just not there. I don't think the problem is that the story lacks dramatic or serious moments, it has plenty of them. The problem is that many of them arrive before the characters' relationships or conflicts have been given enough time to develop, so the payoff has very little foundation to stand on. Other times, the opposite happens. The story spends so long building towards a dramatic moment that the momentum gradually fades away, and by the time the payoff finally arrives, it feels less like a reward and more like something to check off a list so we can get to the next plot point. As a result, scenes that should be heartbreaking, tense, or cathartic often end up feeling strangely flat. I can understand why they are supposed to matter, but rarely I feel that they do. Now, before we get to the characters, here is the official premise. Pause to read it, and I want you to keep the highlighted sentences in mind. Our inciting incident occurs when court officials stop literally behind Ariana's back And this is how the story explains to us that no matter how talented she is, or how much the Emperor loves her about her brothers, she'll never be an empress because she's a woman, because patriarchy. Understandable? She is Irk, and does get the idea to become empress once she is in her room, but her primary motivation to do so isn't to prove them wrong or become a better ruler. It's that, as an empress, she will be legally allowed to have multiple husbands. Ariana does argue that she'd govern the empire better than her brothers and refuses to let a group of sexist nobles decide her future, but those motivations are low on her priorities compared to her desire for a harem. And then realizes she'll need political allies to claim the throne. That's when she comes up with the idea of creating her own jewelry box, gathering attractive, influential men who can become both her lovers and her source of political power. Though, as you can see, both the premise and Ariana's motivation differ. In the personal motivation, her desire for a harem is presented as one of the main reasons she wants to become empress, and doing so is framed as the obstacle standing between her and that goal, but by chapter 11 she already has the harem. The story fulfills Ariana's personal desire long before it fulfills her political goal. But okay, new objective, become empress by going through court politics with the help of her harem, just like the official premise said. Except that isn't, we don't get to see that either. The webtoon barely shows Ariana going through court politics as promised. After she gets her man, keyword after, we don't see her winning over skeptical nobles, going out of her way to make alliances, negotiating, or blackmailing even. Heck, outside of her family and the members of her harem, Ariana barely seems to have meaningful relationships with anyone. Later on, she does get the support of Princess Tetra, but their relationship doesn't get explored, and we don't see anything else from her besides a small conversation she had in chapter 47 with Ariana's fiancé. More importantly, the opposition that was mentioned in chapter 1 stayed in chapter 1. The nobles who supposedly would never tolerate a woman collecting husbands don't present an obstacle. In fact, some panels shows us that both noblemen and women fawn over her harem. Even the arrival of the final jewel is celebrated with an official banquet hosted by the emperor. The first time the story even tries to address the controversy is around chapter 19, when the villainous concubine attempts to shame Ariana during the family dinner by claiming her harem is encouraging noble women to be less virtuous. But the story never shows society reacting to it in any disapproving way, and the concubine's accusations go nowhere in the end. In fact, the second and pretty much the last time we are shown that the nobility supposedly opposes Ariana is in chapter 23. Except they don't. It turns out the whole confrontation was just a test to determine whether she was worthy of hosting a religious ceremony. Now, the story eventually remembers that Ariana needs political support from other nobles, so after the sun ceremony arc, there is a subplot about her divine powers weakening, and if the nobility discovers she is no longer as blessed as they believe, her claim to the throne could be jeopardized. And I will give it to the story from chapters 52 to 55. That was good, a very late plot point, in my opinion, but good. So, if there are no court politics before those chapters, which are only available in French and Korean, then what was the middle plot about? Well, it was exposing the evil concubine's drug scheme and pagan cult. Something that previously had no hints before chapters 1 through 11, but okay, sounds interesting. You would think this is Ariana's opportunity to demonstrate the intelligence, brilliance, charisma, cunning, and leadership skills the story keeps telling us she has. Yet, instead, most of the investigation, evidence gathering, and planning are delegated to the members of her harem. To be fair, this story did let Ariana be exactly the kind of protagonist it kept telling us she is. We can see that briefly in chapter 2 with her talk with Neil, and during the meeting in chapter 17 when she accurately predicts Benella's plan before the banquet. But where her scheming shines the most is in chapters 8 to 10, the ones where she gets Jade, and one of the most disliked part of the story, with just reason. To keep it short, Ariana, disguised as a dancer, knowingly places herself in danger because she knows Jade's father will try to assault her, and when that happens and gets his butt kicked, She accuses him of interrupting a dance meant for the patron deity of Marlowe, fakes an injury, and then uses that to corner Marlowe's nobility into handing over Jade to preserve the alliance between their lands. Then strips Jade's father of his position, transferring the dukedom to his younger daughter, and orders to get him castrated. It was risky, manipulative, and completely selfish, with no regards for the consequences that this would have caused. Even Raymond questions whether this was worth going that far, but ultimately trusts her judgment. More importantly, it was her plan. But why doesn't the story let her do that more often? I am fine with her being manipulative, ruthless, and a bad person in general, even if I don't gravitate towards those kind of characters. But my problem is that we are repeatedly told Ariana is exceptionally intelligent and politically gifted, yet the moments that could showcase those capabilities, either are scarce or belong to someone else. Don't get me wrong, delegating tasks to the harem isn't the problem. Competent leaders delegate all the time. Kings, queens, presidents, and military commanders all rely on advisors and specialists because no one can do everything alone. I am not criticizing that. I criticize what the delegation replaces. Even when she gets her moments to fight or deliver the final confrontation, the behind-the-scenes work that solves the problems rarely comes from her. The plan to convince the nobles that her divine powers hadn't weakened was Raymond's idea, using the Aldebaran to help the people so her reputation doesn't get tainted after the sun ceremony arc. That was his idea too. Collecting evidence by going to social events, she is supposed to be charming and alluring, yet it was Hon who did that. And the same goes to the main villain, Benella, who is constantly described as this brilliant manipulator. We are told she has the Emperor wrapped around her finger, that she is an exceptional socialite, that she has been secretly distributing an illegal drug throughout the Empire without anyone tracing it back to her, and that she is cunning enough to orchestrate an entire conspiracy from the shadows. On paper, that is a fantastic and interesting antagonist. The problem, again, is that the story rarely lets her intelligence shine through her actions and instead portrays her as being one step behind Ariana, always. See my point? If I had to describe in a short sentence why this story doesn't work for me, it would be because of its lack of execution. Looking back on it, I don't think the story has bad ideas, quite the opposite. It has, like I say, a surprising number of interesting concepts, and any one of those could have carried an entire story on their own. Yet, time and time again, the story doesn't quite get how to develop any of them, nor give them the amount of time they deserve on page. The harem is assembled before we've had the chance to know its members, the political resistance we are told exists rarely materializes, core politics give way to an entirely different conflict, character development is often replaced with exposition, or it's done badly, and world building is delivered through lengthy lore dumps and footnotes instead of being woven naturally into the narrative. Rather than letting us discover the world alongside its characters, the comic frequently pauses to explain it. Rather than letting Ariana prove she is an exceptional future ruler through her actions, the story often tells us she is, or hands the most interesting part of the plan to someone else. Ironically, whenever the series slows down long enough to actually let Ariana scheme, it proves it can tell the story it promised from the beginning. Because beneath all of that, the pacing issues, the tonal wish plus, the exposition dumps, I can still see the outline of a genuinely compelling and entertaining story, and that's only talking about the plot structure. I haven't even touched on the freaking translation, the characterization, the world building, the handling of certain sensitive topics, or some of the story's more questionable creative decisions. Those are conversations for another time, and I hope that time comes soon, or else I will never finish the drawing. If you want to add your grain of sand or do not share my opinions, do it here in the comments. Bye!